given here in our new facility. And for those of you in here, I'm sure that you're awed by it just like I was the first time coming in. It's a wonderful facility that we have for our community, in large part due to Lisa Mallock and her generous donation for us. And this is Joe Hancock, our new gastroenterologist here, and we're here to talk to you a little bit about the gut biome. And the title of this is Healthy Body, Belly equals Healthy Body. So we're going to divide it up into three parts, and I'll start by giving some of the background and the basics of the relationship that we all have with the biome that lives in our gut. And then Dr. Hancock is going to highlight some of the dietary patterns and our biome, and also some of the common GI diseases that are influenced by our biome. And we should have time for questions at the end. So when we talk about the microbiome, what we're talking about is the microscopic organisms that live on us and inside of us. And they're too small for us to see. And they're mostly bacteria, yeasts, and viruses. And our gut is actually, you can think of it as a long tube that begins in the mouth and ends at the anus. And what's inside this gut tube is within our bodies, but it's not exactly inside our bodies. It's in this tube that's in our bodies. And so the bacteria that live there, the microbiome that lives there, are in the mouth, the esophagus, the stomach, the small intestine, and our large intestine, or colon, which is most of what we're going to talk about. What we're talking about today when we talk about bacteria, it's the colon bacteria for the most part. And this diagram there on the right shows the approximate sizes of these microscopic organisms in relationship to one another. And you can see that the gut cell on the right, that kind of pale yellow one, is much larger than either the yeasts or the bacteria, but what isn't shown is the virus. And that's for two reasons. Number one, a virus is very small. It's so small you couldn't see it on this. The largest of the viruses are about 1/10 the size of the bacteria. And you see how small the purple little dots, those are the bacteria. So a virus is 1/10 or less that size. And then the second reason is that viruses are actually a little bit separate from either bacteria or yeast, because viruses are incomplete organisms. They can't grow and they can't reproduce themselves. They have to have a host that has the molecular machinery to do that. So it's kind of a whole different talk. They're very important. It's very interesting. They outnumber the bacteria by a large number, but we're not going to talk about them today. We got it out. So I want to take a minute and go back in time to give some context to the relationship that we have with our gut biome. And there's a couple ways of looking at it. And in one, we realize that modern humans, Homo sapiens, have been here on Earth between 50,000 and 100,000 years. And on the other hand, bacteria have been on the Earth nearly 44 billion years, which is about 40,000 times longer than humans have been here on Earth. And that's actually not even the most important part. The most important part contrasts the number of generations that humans have undergone versus the number of generations that bacteria have undergone during this same time span. And the reason the number of generations is important is because adaptation to the environment by any life form happens as reproduction, as we reproduce. And so it generally takes between 20 and 30 years for a human generation. But for a bacteria, a single generation is about 20 minutes. Okay? So for every single human generation of 20 years, bacteria have over 500,000 generations. So you think about that, that's a pretty big number. Well, bacteria have literally undergone trillions of generations compared to 3,000 to 5,000 generations for modern humans. And those numbers are just too big for me to comprehend, but I do think that they help with our understanding that because bacteria have been here for so long, they've pioneered and established many of the metabolic rules that our cells operate within, and they're able to adapt to us as their human hosts. They have plenty of time to do it. So, and then one thing that I want to, before we leave this slide, I wanted to comment on, and that is how we characterize bacteria as just simple, single, primitive cells. And I think we humans seem to have a mental construct. It's a paradigm of human supremacy. And we think of ourselves as the top dogs. We think we can do what we want. We think other life forms exist for our benefit, and sometimes that's true. But it's been our thinking for hundreds of years, and as scientists have studied bacteria, they've discovered, well, they're actually more advanced than we thought. And even though we always thought of them just as isolated primitive organisms, they can actually work together. They can work in concert with one another. And in fact, it turns out bacteria can communicate. And they communicate with each other using a chemical language. And what they do is they secrete a single specific chemical which functions like a word. And when enough individual bacteria contribute enough words, the bacteria collectively sense that they have a quorum. And when they have a quorum, they can switch on a particular gene to produce, for example, a toxin, or a different species of bacteria might turn on a different gene, a different switch for a different gene, which would produce a substance that's essential to our lives. And the importance of this is that the formation of toxins or substances that are essential to our lives is under the control of bacterial genes, not our genes. And secondly, we need bacteria to be normal and to function at our best. And then the third thing is that we really need to move beyond this paradigm of human supremacy so that we can be more intellectually open and not so arrogant in our views of life. Otherwise, we're blind sometimes to the alternative explanations and the alternative possibilities that science informs us about. So let's move on to something that's easier to comprehend than those big numbers, and something just as extraordinary, and that is that the bacterial biome that we have living on and within us has 10 times more bacterial cells than in all of the cells within our whole human body. And if we have 10 times more bacterial cells than human cells, that means that there's over 100 times more bacterial genes than the genes in our cells. And so we're grossly outnumbered by bacterial cells on our body. And we start to conceptualize ourselves, us humans, as small ecosystems. We're part human, and we're part of microbiome, the paradigm of human supremacy has some cracks in it. So why are we just finding out about this now? Why didn't we learn this in school? Wasn't everybody listening? Well, it's partly because of the human supremacy paradigm, but it's mostly because of the historical difficulties that we've had in growing or culturing bacteria. It's challenging and an arduous task to get some of these organisms to grow so that we can study them. But new technologies, we can now differentiate bacteria using molecular probes. And we can identify them, we can separate them, we can study them much easier than in years gone by. And as a result of these new methods, the U.S. government has launched a project similar to the Human Genome Project of the 1990s. And this time it's called the Human Microbiome Project. And the goal of this project is to identify and to catalog and to characterize the entire breadth that live on us and within us. And as a result of this project, we're realizing there are thousands of types of bacteria in our gut, and that there are sometimes huge variations in the microbiomes between individual people, and also that members of the same class of bacteria, some can be really good and some can really be bad. So it's more complicated, like everything, than what we thought. And these studies are really just emerging. So stay tuned. There's going to be a lot about this over the next 10 to 20 years. So let's leave history behind us and move on to the topic at hand, which is what exactly these bacteria do anyway. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight 11 important relationships which scientists have uncovered so far. And these relationships are in addition to the basic functions of gut bacteria, which is to help break down the foods that we eat into smaller pieces so that we can absorb them. So number one, the first way our gut bacteria help us is by producing vitamins. And vitamins like B12, vitamin K, vitamin folic acid, each of these are vital to our health. In fact, that's where the name came from. They were vital amines. And yet these vitamins we cannot produce ourselves. And most of the vitamins we can get from plants or from animal foods, but vitamin B12, I want to take a minute on that, is unique because it's essential to us, yet neither plants nor animals make B12. Only our friends, the bacteria, do. And B12 is important in the formation of our red blood cells. If we don't have enough B12, our cells balloon up and we become anemic. And the more important thing is what the relationship they have with the brain. If we don't have enough B12, we become demented and psychotic. So we want to make sure we have enough of that. And we can get B12 by eating animal products, but animals get their B12 by eating plants, because the plants that they eat are usually contaminated with dirt, which contain the B12 forming bacteria. And we can also get B12 from certain plants, such as nutritional yeast, some of the fermented products, but as with the animal products, the nutritional yeast got its B12 from bacteria. And then number two is essential amino acids, which our gut bacteria produce. And amino acids are like the building blocks that proteins are made of. And proteins are important. They are critical transport molecules on our, that's you, Glenn. Just kidding. Proteins, they're critical molecules within our cell walls. They can pick up molecules on the outside that makes them change shape, and they can transfer it to the inside of cell. And they also function as enzymes that drive the metabolic machinery inside of our cells. And so essential amino acids are called essential because we need them. We can't form them ourselves, and neither can other animals like cows or pigs or chickens. And of the 20 total amino acids, there are 9 which are neither we nor these other animals can make. And we get all of these essential amino acids from eating plants or animals. But the animals got theirs from eating the plants. So when it comes to the amino acid itself, it doesn't really matter whether you get it from a plant or an animal. The amino acid itself is the same. However, many nutrition experts today recommend getting our amino acids that are essential from plants. And why is that? It's because plants don't carry the excess baggage that animal amino acids and protein carry with them. Things like cholesterol and saturated fat and the lack of fiber. So moving on, I think it helps to characterize the gut as the interface between us and the outside world. And the surface of this gut interface is huge. It's the size of half of a tennis court. compared to the surface of our skin, which is about 2 square meters. And this interface has to be permeable enough to allow nutrients to pass into the body, and they have to be tight enough to keep harmful bacteria and substances out. And part of how this happens is through the mucus that's secreted by our own cells, which line the inside of our intestines. And this mucus acts both as a barrier to invasion and as a layer through which nutrients can pass. And the mucus has to be of good quality to be able to perform both of these functions. And although our intestinal cells are the things that produce the mucus, these lining cells are nourished by bacteria. And the things that they're nourished with is a substance called butyrate. And butyrate is the best, and it's the preferred metabolic fuel for these cells that line our intestine. And they can get nutrients from the circulating blood supplies, nutrients like glucose or other molecules, but they produce the best mucus on a diet of butyrate. And butyrate is also felt to reduce our risk of colorectal cancer, so it has a couple of functions. And so when the lining cells are well nourished, they not only produce good quality mucus, but they form tight junctions between one another as a barrier to bacterial invasion. So the diagram on this slide contrasts a fiber-rich diet on the left with a fiber-free diet on the right. And the reason we're talking about fiber is that fiber is what it's what is the non-digestible fiber for us, but it's food for the bacteria. So we don't digest it, but they do. And in fact, this non-digestible fiber is called a prebiotic because it feeds our bacteria as opposed to a probiotic that is the bacteria themselves. And so the green up there represents the inside of the intestine, the lumen of the intestine. The pink is the mucus layer, and the gray rectangles at the bottom are the cells that line the gut wall. And the left-hand picture, again, is the fiber-rich side, and the fiber-free side is on the right. So on that left side, butyrate is high, and this butyrate nourishes the lining cells. Notice how the mucus there is thicker than on the other side, and the left-hand cells also have little hair-like structures on the top, and these are important for food absorption, and the junctions between the cells on the left are tight. And the right-hand picture is the fiber-free side, and it's low on butyrate, so there's much less mucus produced, and the lining cells themselves aren't as healthy. You see that they don't have that the little hair stuff, and they're not as uniform in size, and they aren't as tight. The junctions aren't as tight. So the idea is that we want to, fiber is good for us. We want to feed our gut biome lots of fiber, and remember that fiber is only produced by plants. It's not produced by animals. And then number 4 is that some bacteria secrete inflammatory substances. Inflammation is a double-edged sword. We need it in certain situations, but too much in the wrong places can be very bad for us. In the case of inflammation that's caused by our immune cells, that inflammation is very localized, it's directed at specific bacteria, and it kills them. We need that, but in other circumstances, bacteria secrete inflammatory substances as just part of their normal growth cycle. And when they do that, these inflammatory substances can cause chronic low-grade inflammation. And chronic low-grade inflammation accelerates many of our chronic diseases. Diseases like heart disease, diabetes, cancer, and autoimmune disease. And it may even be a major part of the cause of inflammatory bowel disease, which Dr. Hancock will talk about. And then number 5 is other gut bacteria secrete anti-inflammatory molecules. And we get anti-inflammatory molecules also directly from plants, but also from bacteria. And the anti-inflammatory molecules lessen that chronic low-grade inflammation. It promotes tight junctions between the intestinal lining cells, and it can help
calm the environment down, which improves these chronic diseases. So we want to promote the growth of these anti-inflammatory producing bacteria in our gut. Moving on to number 6, one of the most important parts of our relationship with our gut biome is with our immune system. And as we said, the surface area of the gut is huge. So we have a large exposure there to the dangers of this outside world. And it is a dangerous world. But fear not, 70% of our immune system is located in the gut. And the immune systems or the immune cells in the gut, they can recognize the difference between friend and foe. And if a bacterial pathogen, which is a disease-producing bacteria, if a bacterial pathogen is detected, immune cells protect us by creating this targeted inflammatory response which destroys the pathogen. So this inflammatory response is essential to keep us healthy, but if there's too much inflammation, or if the inflammation occurs too close to the lining of the cells, or if it's even directed at our own cells, it's dangerous. And autoimmune diseases are an example of the result of that. Diseases like rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, they're all examples of the immune system going overboard. Number 7 is the fascinating and really clever way that bacteria work with our immune systems. You see, bacteria, certain ones of them, are helpful. We don't want to be wasting time and energy to destroy them. And so these bacteria have adapted to be able to mimic portions of human proteins. And then these mimicking proteins are arranged on the exposed surface of the bacteria. And so our immune system cells see what appears to them to be human proteins, and they don't attack them or mount an inflammatory response. And this reduces the inflammation, which gives the bacteria protection from our immune system, and it also protects the lining of the gut from becoming collateral damage in an inflammatory situation. And then number 8 is actually a potentially harmful relationship we have with our gut biome. And that comes when bacterial cells die. They break apart and they liberate fragments of their cell walls. And if these cell wall fragments migrate through the mucus and get into our bloodstream, they can cause chronic low-grade inflammation, which stimulates that host of chronic diseases I mentioned. And for some of you in this audience, it's also thought to be a significant promoter of aging. So we want to watch that one too. So it's another reason that a quality mucus barrier and having tight junctions between those intestinal lining cells is important. And if the last 8 things weren't enough, there's also a relationship that the gut biome has with our brains. And this is very interesting, and it's almost an area unto itself. It's called the psychobiome. I love that word, psychobiome. And there are very important interactions there being uncovered. And certain populations of gut bacteria can promote or they can reduce anxiety. Other populations can promote or reduce depression and possibly other mental health conditions, including autism. And they do this by making and releasing chemical messengers which can stimulate nerves directly, or they can be absorbed into the bloodstream and affect the brain directly. And the work in this area is preliminary, but it's very promising. And so I think that's another one to stay tuned to in the years ahead. And then there's number 10. And this is a harmful relationship that we have with our gut biome. And it involves a substance called TMAO, or trimethylamine oxide. And TMAO accelerates cardiovascular disease and some dementias because it promotes hardening of the arteries. And TMAO is actually produced by the liver, but only after bacteria produce TMA, which is the precursor of TMAO. So the bacteria produce the TMA from carnitine and from lecithin, which are found in meat, eggs, and dairy. And this may account for the significant part of the increased incidence of heart attacks in people who eat beef, eggs, and dairy. And I saved this last point for the last because I thought it might have caused too much commotion if I'd have brought this up earlier. But what I'm talking about is what they found in studying the gut biome from identical twins. And remember, identical twins have the same genes. That's why they're called identical. But they've studied specific sets of identical twins where one twin is obese and the other twin has normal weight. And they've taken a sample of the bacterial biome from each twin, and then they placed it in genetically identical mice. And they then fed the mice identical diets. And what they find is that the mice getting the biome from the obese twin become obese. And the identical mouse getting the biome from the normal twin is slim. And they thought this was pretty interesting. So then they decided to eradicate all the bacteria from these mice. And they gave them powerful antibiotics and who knows what else. And then they reintroduced these two different biomes. But this time they switched which mouse group got which. And what happened is that the formerly thin mice, which this time got the fat twin biome, they got fat. And the formerly fat mice, which had gotten the thin twin biome, they became thin. The diet was the same. So this suggests that obesity is not entirely from what we eat, which is something overweight people and patients have been telling us for years. And I'm convinced that it's not the answer, the entire answer to our obesity epidemic, but it's an intriguing finding. So stay tuned. Again, it tells us we don't know everything. We need to be open-minded as we look at scientific results. So those are the 11 influences that our gut biome has on our health. And now I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Hancock, our new gastroenterologist, who will give us some insights on diets, biomes, and specific GI conditions which have a close relationship with our diet. Okay.
Got it down. Okay. I'm going to handicap my hand movements here, so you make me hold that microphone. Hi, I'm Joe Hancock. I'm kind of brand new to the Tahoe area and brought my family up here 3 months ago. So we're here. And my family loves it so far. Two important issues that we need to talk about is that probiotics were thought to be the solver of everything, and it turns out that it's not true, except for in certain circumstances, and I'll mention those briefly. But probiotics is not currently sold in the diet that we're using actually determines it. And your gut biome will change as early as 3 days. Okay, you can actually change the bacterial flora by what you eat in 3 days. Okay, this is what you should and should not be eating. On your left is bad, on your right is good. So you have the carnivores, you have the lacto-carnivore vegetarians, and you have the total vegetarians. So, you know, stopping by the donut hut on the way to work is not a good idea. Cheeses, chocolate, burgers, red meats, they're, you know, yes, the good doctor here told us earlier that they have the lecithin that's going to change the bacterial flora and it's going to potentially make people predisposed to heart disease.